Picture this, you're a stressed medical student, sprinting down the street trying to catch a bus. Your heart is absolutely pounding, your lungs are heaving, and your leg muscles are burning. In that exact fraction of a second, billions of your cells are frantically burning through molecular fuel just to keep you moving. But how exactly does a microscopic blob of water and proteins generate the sheer mechanical force needed to propel your entire body forward? Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going straight into the heart of cellular energy. We're going to solve the beautiful, complex puzzle of how living systems harness the foundational physics of bioenergetics to actually survive.
We've got 6 core sections to cover today. We'll start with the engine of life, move into equilibrium and redox potential, explore protons, heat, and order, then synthesize thermodynamic spontaneity, talk about the speed of life, and finally wrap up with synthesis and active review.
All right, part 1, the engine of life, foundations of bioenergetics.
To truly grasp bioenergetics, I want you to think of a human cell as a bustling, microscopic metropolis. Just like a massive city, it requires a ceaseless, uninterrupted supply of power to keep the lights on, transport vital cargo, and rebuild after any damage. Bioenergetics is what elegantly bridges the gap between cold, hard thermodynamics, which are the absolute rules dictating if a reaction can even happen, and the dynamic kinetics of living systems, which dictate how fast it happens.
Let's break down the actual anatomy of biological work. In physics, energy is basically the ability to perform work by moving matter along a potential gradient, and all forms of work boil down to 2 fundamental quantities. First, we have the intensity factor. Think of this as the steepness of a hill. It's the driving potential difference. Second, there's the capacity factor, which is simply the physical quantity of the substance that's being moved. In the realm of bioenergetics, our main focus is chemical work. Here, the intensity factor is the change in free enthalpy, also known as chemical potential, and the capacity factor is the actual quantity of the reacting molecules. Every single time your heart beats or a neuron fires, your cells are performing chemical work based on this exact relationship.
So the crucial question here is, why do some reactions just happen on their own while others absolutely refuse to budge? Well, it depends entirely on that potential difference. If a process is exergonic, matter moves down the potential gradient. It loses energy and happens spontaneously, kind of like a ball rolling effortlessly down a staircase. But your cells constantly need to perform endergonic tasks, right? Moving matter up the gradient, which requires energy. So how do they do the impossible? Through energetic coupling, which is literally the engine of life. Think of this like a microscopic pulley system. The cell pairs a heavily endergonic, non-spontaneous process with a massively exergonic one, like the breakdown of ATP. ATP hydrolysis acts as a heavy weight pulling a much lighter weight up the pulley. As long as the combined sum of those potential differences is negative, the entire system proceeds spontaneously. Without this clever trick, complex life would just grind to a halt.
Moving on to section 2, equilibrium and redox potential, driving chemical reactions.
Now that we understand how cells use coupling to drive reactions, how do they maintain the constant voltage and chemical drive necessary to keep this whole thing going? Here is a wild, vital truth in biology. Total chemical equilibrium actually means cell death. Living cells must constantly maintain a state of disequilibrium. According to the law of mass action, chemical equilibrium is where the forward and backward rates perfectly equalize. But consider transferring ammonia to glutamate to form glutamine. That's Endergonic. On its own, it reaches equilibrium so incredibly fast that almost no glutamine is actually made. So to survive, the body uses the highly exergonic breakdown of ATP, which has a massive group transfer potential, to essentially force this stubborn ammonia transfer forward. By constantly shifting these equilibrium points, your cells keep the machinery running.
Beyond just transferring phosphate groups like ATP does, cells also survive by transferring electrons. The tendency to exchange electrons is dictated by a system's redox potential. And the golden rule to remember here is, the lower the redox potential, the higher the chemical potential of the transferred electrons. We calculate this driving force using the Nernst equation, which shows us that a positive change in redox potential means a spontaneous, negative change in free energy. Now, if you look at the math under standard conditions, transferring an electron from lactate to NAD+ is technically impossible. But cells actually manipulate this. By creating a massive surplus of pyruvate and oxidized NAD+, they completely flip the potential difference, forcing mathematically impossible electron transfers to proceed successfully. It's brilliant. This is exactly how your cells generate life-sustaining voltage.
Let's hit section 3, protons, heat, and order, the role of pH, enthalpy, and entropy.
Okay, having mastered electrons, we now shift our focus to protons, environmental heat flow, and the structural chaos that plays a massive role in maintaining cellular homeostasis. Whenever we talk about proton exchange, we are dealing with conjugated acid-base pairs and pH. The ultimate measure of a molecule's proton transfer potential is its pKa value. As a fundamental rule of thumb, the stronger the acid, the lower its pKa value. Using the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation, we can map how this inherent pKa interacts with the environmental pH. An acid with a lower pKa, like acetic acid, will naturally and spontaneously donate a proton to a base with a higher pKa, like ammonia. Why does this matter to you? Because every single enzyme in your body relies on precise protonations, and medications are absorbed strictly based on their pKa relative to the pH of your stomach and intestines.
And just as protons flow, so does heat. This brings us to enthalpy, or delta H, measured at a constant pressure. We have exothermic reactions that lose heat to the environment, giving us a negative delta H, and endothermic reactions that absorb heat, giving a positive delta H. To calculate exactly how much chemical work can be extracted from this heat flow, scientists use physical calorimetry. You literally burn a weighted amount of food in a pressurized vessel. The released enthalpy heats the surrounding water. And since we know 1 kilojoule warms 1 liter of water by 0.24 degrees Celsius, we can calculate the exact energy potential of that food. It is living proof that your body is a highly regulated combustion engine powered by biochemical heat exchange.
But here is a fascinating paradox. If exothermic reactions release heat and favor spontaneity, why do some endothermic reactions, which absorb heat, still happen spontaneously? The answer is entropy, or delta S. The second law of thermodynamics dictates that nature universally favors chaos. Entropy is simply the degree of order in a system. Increased chaos yields a positive change in entropy. We synthesize this with the absolute master equation of life, the Gibbs-Helmholtz equation. To remember this one, just use this essential mnemonic. Gibbs hates tidy spaces. Let me say that again. Gibbs hates tidy spaces. Delta G equals delta H minus T times delta S. Spontaneity favors negative enthalpy, which is heat release, and positive entropy, which is tidy spaces becoming chaotic. As long as a reaction generates enough molecular chaos to offset the energy cost, it will be spontaneous.
Section 4. Synthesizing thermodynamic spontaneity, enthalpy versus entropy.
So, how does this mathematical tug-of-war between heat release and structural disorder actually play out in real-world biochemical reactions? Let's contrast two very distinct paths to spontaneity. On one hand, we have the enthalpy-driven null gas reaction, which forms liquid water from gas. Now, water is more ordered than gas, meaning an unfavorable negative entropy shift. But the reaction releases a massive amount of heat. This overwhelming heat entirely overrides the structural ordering cost, resulting in a spontaneous reaction. On the other hand, we have the entropy-driven process of dissolving table salt. This actually absorbs heat, making the water slightly colder, which is an unfavorable endothermic shift. But that rigid salt lattice breaks into total chaos. This sudden explosion of molecular disorder totally overcomes the cooling effect, making the dissolving process spontaneous. Spontaneity is always this delicate tug-of-war between energy release and the relentless march toward chaos.
Section 5. The speed of life. Reaction kinetics.
Up to this point, we've only discussed thermodynamics, which basically just tells us if a reaction can happen. But that tells us absolutely nothing about the biological speed limit. Even if a reaction is highly spontaneous, most organic reactions proceed at an agonizingly slow pace. Why? Because they are blocked by a massive energy barrier known as the activation energy. Molecules have to absorb a required energy surge to trigger conversion, and this is completely governed by temperature and chaotic collisions. Just look at the Q10 law. It states that raising the molecular temperature by just 10 degrees Celsius safely doubles the number of molecules with enough kinetic energy to jump the barrier. This is exactly why a fever dangerously accelerates your metabolic burn rate and why your body rigorously defends its 37-degree core temperature. To predict this speed, we categorize reactions into specific orders. A first-order reaction involves a single reactant converting into a product. If you double the reactant, you double the speed. A second-order reaction involves two distinct reactants colliding. The velocity here is proportional to the mathematical product of both reactant concentrations. These rates are tied together by rate constants that fluctuate with temperature.
And listen, calculating these rates is not just theory. It is the fundamental mathematical basis for drug clearance in pharmacokinetics. It tells a physician exactly how long a specific drug will remain active in your bloodstream based on these exact kinetic principles.
Finally, Section 6, Synthesis and Active Review, the Golden Rules of Bioenergetics. We have covered a tremendous amount of ground today, from the potential of electrons to the speed of molecular collisions. Let's bring these dual domains together into one unified biological framework. On one side, thermodynamics represents the if and how much. It relies on the free enthalpy change to determine spontaneity, utilizing energetic coupling to forcefully drag those impossible endergonic reactions forward. On the other side, reaction kinetics represents the when and how fast. While you absolutely cannot cheat thermodynamics, cells masterfully manipulate kinetics through enzymatic catalysis. By deploying enzymes to artificially lower the activation barrier, the body ensures that spontaneous reactions occur at biologically viable, lightning-fast speeds. By mastering both of these sides, you crack the ultimate code of cellular biology.
To really lock this all in, I want to leave you with 3 active recall questions based directly on what we just explored. First, how do matter and energy flow differently regarding potential gradients in exergonic versus endergonic processes? Second, applying the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation, what is the fundamental rule of thumb regarding a molecule's pKa value and its acid strength? And third, according to the Q10 law, how precisely does a 10 degrees Celsius increase in temperature affect the speed of biological processes? Think deeply about these, as they are the keys to understanding the literal engine of your life. Keep asking questions, keep studying the structures, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.